Welcome to Healthy Canadians, your space for nuanced conversations and expert insights into the health topics that matter to us all. I'm your host, Beahen. Here with me today is Alex Newman, producer and co-host.
Hey, Megan, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. I was thinking about it a bit today, given the topic that we're tackling today. I think sometimes when you need help the most, it's probably when it's the hardest to reach out and actually ask for it, right?
I think that's true. And today we're talking about a really important resource that is designed to help with that. And that's the 988 Suicide Crisis Helpline. And our guest is Dr. Allison Crawford. She's the Chief Medical Officer for the helpline. And we're going to be joined by a responder who works there.
That's really important, and I think that'll be a unique perspective. And so today is part one of a two-part series. We're going to focus a bit on the higher level stuff in terms of like what is 988, why is it needed, who is it serving, all of those kinds of things. And then in part two, we're going to dig into a bit more of the experience of like what happens when you actually call. Who do you talk to? What sort of things can you access, and all of those things. But before we jump in, just a quick word from us. So although Healthy Canadians is produced by Health Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada, what we discuss won't always reflect the official policies or positions of the Government of Canada. That's okay. These are conversations, not news releases.
Let's talk about 988. Hello, Allison and Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us on Healthy Canadians today.
It's really fun to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Allison, let's start with you. You're the Chief Medical Officer for 988. How did you get that job?
Oh, a really good question. Well, I've been involved since 988. 988 started as Talk Suicide Canada, also sort of precursor to the national 988. And I've been involved in that and in launching the service, the 988 service, and really have a role to kind of help oversee the clinical aspects of 988 and the policies and the procedures, and got the title to go with that role.
Excellent. Thank you. And Aaron, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you do at 988.
Yeah, so hello everyone. My name's Aaron, pronouns are he and him, and yeah, I'm a 988 National Crisis Line responder. So what I do is that I answer calls and texts of service users who kind of chat in and call in to 988 who are needing some support and just some crisis intervention related to like thoughts related to suicide or just kind of things that are going on in their life. And for me, kind of how I ended up in this role is that I was a volunteer at a crisis line organization since August of 2020. And for me as well, I got into this field as a whole, where I graduated with a bachelor's in psychology, and was just involved in a lot of mental health aspects on campus related to destigmatization campaigns with advocacy, and also with some research on how to better support incoming post-secondary students who are experiencing suicide thoughts and behaviors. So this role kind of came along, and I kind of applied for it, and now I'm here and just helping some Canadians with what they're going through. So yeah.
Very cool. And what does a typical day look like, Aaron, as a responder?
Ooh.
Or a typical day for you,
yeah.
Aaron?
Yeah, for me, I would say kind of going into kind of my workplace and just kind of getting to kind of check in with my supervisors and some colleagues that I'm seeing kind of in the office and kind of catching up with them for a little bit, setting up my workstation, kind of getting my notes ready, the apps that I'm using are prepared, and then kind of taking some calls and or texts depending on kind of what that day like I'm scheduled for. And I am able to talk to kind of people like who are experiencing like thoughts of suicide, potential plans or timelines and things like that. And I help with de-escalating kind of what's going on and potentially like helping with safety planning and scheduling follow-up calls and all those things as well. Just kind of going through interactions, doing some documentation, and then just kind of connecting with colleagues to debrief afterwards. And yeah, that's kind of like the high level gist of kind of what I do in a day. But I can definitely talk more about it as we move into the podcast.
That's great. And Allison, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your training or your background and why you're so passionate about 988.
Yes, so I'm a psychiatrist by training and also a health researcher, but I think I got very interested in this area working in the community. So most of my training was in a hospital setting, and then after I graduated, I worked a lot in rural communities in Nunavut in Northern Ontario, and really got to see what mental health was like kind of experienced in day-to-day life, and realized that not everyone has access to full mental health services, and certainly not if they're in crisis. And got very involved in suicide prevention and different aspects of that, and saw this as a gap in Canada, something that was happening elsewhere, having an accessible 3-digit line. Well, we didn't know then it would be 3 digits, but having an accessible number to call if you are in crisis, no matter who you are or where you are.
So what is 988 exactly?
Yeah, so the full name is 988 Suicide Crisis Helpline, which I feel says a lot about it. So it's a 3-digit number that anyone in Canada can call and receive support by a live responder in English or French, no matter who they are or where they are. And our focus really is on suicide prevention. But we also like to say there's no wrong number. So we answer every call, but our focus is really suicide prevention and connecting with people when they're in distress.
Excellent. And could you tell us a little bit about why that is so important right now? Like, why do we need this in Canada right now?
Yes. I mean, a lot of people talk about the COVID-19 pandemic, and definitely, I know even during that time working in the crisis line context, we saw, and I'm sure Aaron, you saw and have heard about this, a lot more distress. A lot people really needing somewhere to connect. But I think it really predates that. And the research that we have also shows that for about the last 10 years, rates of mental health related concerns have really been climbing in all groups across Canada, but especially among the young and older people as well. So I think, we need something. I don't think it's the whole solution for what we need, but we definitely need something.
Yeah. If I may kind of jump in too, is where, especially with 988 and just kind of with crisis lines as a whole, is where there's like a lot of different features related to like just crisis lines that help with that accessibility piece. So like, for example, like given that we have like the call and the text modalities, that's where I know some of my peers were like, I don't want to call. Like, I'd rather text people. Or like, I know other people like, I'd rather call instead of text. So to have these two different modalities help with kind of reaching a lot of different audiences across Canada, really, again, speaks to that accessibility piece for supporting people's mental health. And even just with kind of my experiences and just kind of talk with like people during my volunteering and with 988 is where that piece of them talking to a stranger helps a lot too, where a lot of people tell me that like I wouldn't have shared all this with people that I know in my life, where they don't want to kind of make people feel concerned for them, and for them to have access to this as well, just to speak to someone who can just let things out and just talk with someone. Again, that accessibility piece is really important, and they don't have to make an appointment. They don't have to commute to a specific place. Like they can do it from the comforts of their home. So again, that kind of brings things to where service users are at to help them out with kind of what they're going through. So yeah, just kind of adding on to this accessibility piece is like, it's really important, especially right now.
Yeah, so I'm hearing it's accessible, it's anonymous, you're getting in contact with people who are trained to have these sorts of conversations. How does 988 different than other services available? How does it like stand alone from other things?
Right. Well, you've just reminded me to talk about the fact that it is a network of providers, and I think that makes it very special as well. It helps to keep a community-based focus on suicide prevention, so it's not a central call center. It's really almost 40 partners in every province and territory in Canada that provide this service through the 988 number. So they're very familiar with their communities and the needs of their communities. And all of those services together, I think, do give it a unique flavor. Like you will get your call answered close to home, and you can still call all of those services as well. So there are other crisis and distress lines. Some they serve a specific population or different needs. Okay. But the focus of 988 is really on suicide prevention, and I think that makes it unique.
Okay. So you can, if you're not sure who to call, also, you can always start with 988, right?
That's a great way to put it. And the 3-digit number makes that very easy. We hope that's a number that everyone comes to know, and that they will call there if they don't know who to call.
Yeah, thinking about the accessibility piece too, it strikes me that both, Aaron, like when you mentioned being able to text too, it's interesting that those kind of simpler things like the ability to use different modalities or just having a 3-digit number. I mean, we know how ubiquitous 911 is.
Right, exactly.
Everybody knows 911, and hopefully that becomes true too with 988, that it's just something we're all aware of all the time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll start with Allison, then I'll ask Aaron too. When you call 988, who are you talking to, and how are they trained or prepared to have these conversations?
Right. Well, this is why I'm really glad we have you here, Aaron. You really give a flavor of like who could be there. So responders are people from across the country. They do, from all different kinds of backgrounds and different ages, and some are paid, some are volunteer, but you will always get a live responder when you call. And that person will always be trained, and in particular trained in suicide prevention. They know, Aaron, you've already given a sense of this, but they know how to connect with people, how to engage, how to listen without judgment, and also how to look for risks for suicide and look for people's strengths as well, collaborate with them, plan with them, and also instill hope in many cases, and listen with compassion and without judgment.
Thank you.
Yeah. And that's basically just kind of a lot of what Allison had mentioned, Dr. Crawford had mentioned too, is where, for me, even just kind of answering calls is where, for me, kind of my mindset is knowing that this could be the first time that they have verbalized this outside of their head. And that for me, that sets the tone for myself to know that this is a chance to support them, because I am also aware how there is that taboo, right? And there is that stigma related to suicide in our communities, and they may have experienced that invalidation and that minimization of their experiences in the past. So for me to be that chance to show them that, hey, like I am here to listen, and I will be here to be in this space of pain and in this space of struggle, and to be with you. And for me to sometimes when I ask them, like, and I say, like, tell me more, that itself gives them the permission and tells them that this is a space that they can talk about this. And I've had calls where when I kind of open these things up, like they get emotional. And that's where they don't tell me kind of that this is a difficult experience for them, but it's where I can pick things up through that. And so that's kind of just how I kind of frame how I approach these calls, and text as well. Text might be a little bit different in terms of kind of what I can and can't hear, but just the ability to kind of give people that space to know that there is someone who's empathetic and is willing to listen is really important. And similar to what Dr. Crawford mentioned too, is where risk assessment wise, like I ask kind of some questions related to suicide. And of course, if there's any other risks that can come up, like child abuse, domestic violence, self-harm, like as a responder, like we also look into those things too. And not to kind of be like interrogative, but it's for us to understand the context of kind of the situation and to get caught up in kind of like, hey, like how are they doing? Where are they at right now? And then just identifying strengths and just kind of what works for them. Because in terms of like crisis intervention and just kind of supporting people, it's making sure that we work with them and meet the service user where they're at. Where as much as I could give like an idea of like what works for me, I'm not the service user. And that's where it's using the strengths of the service user and using what works with the service user to make it so that the plan to stay safe, or the plan to be healthy, or the plan to be better works for them. And that is they're more willing to work on that after the call or the text. And lastly, in terms of the safety planning piece, if there's any kind of risks for suicide that come up, that's where responders like me would kind of offer to develop a safety plan with service users as a way to kind of help service users stay safe, and check in with them how they're feeling, and then kind of let them go to the rest of their day. yeah, so that's kind of just a little snippet of kind of what I do on the responder side of things.
Thanks, Aaron. And this is why it's so great to have you here, because not only because you are so friendly and warm, but it gives a real face to who someone might be talking to if they called in, right? And we live in a world where, if you're texting a service, you don't know if you're talking to a bot or a person, or at least I have trouble sometimes determining, am I talking to a real person right now?
Service users.
Yeah,
I have had service users ask me. Yeah, it's like, are you a real person?
Yes.
I was like, yes, I am a real person.
Yeah, like I want to know that I'm getting guidance from a real Aaron, right? And so I think that's so cool. And then also, maybe Allison, you could also add on about like why it's so important to talk to a responder that's like in your area.
Right. Well, one of the things that you said really resonated, Aaron, that just to be with you. Because, yes, we have all kinds of techniques and things we can do, but I think that sense of being with someone is so important. And if you know their context, I think that does help. Now, we also do have some very important national providers. So it's not that local providers are the only people who can provide support. In fact, if so there's an option when you call. If you are First Nation, Inuit, or Métis, you can choose to speak to Hope for Wellness. And so that's a national service. We also have Kids Help Phone, who is one of our partners. So it's not that people can't provide that service if they're not in the local area, but we think that's an important component and brings a different context or an understanding of the person's context.
I guess that's another aspect of accessibility too, is like from a community perspective too, and who is able to access it. I know that must have been a lot of effort put into planning around that and thinking that through too. So you mentioned that, but how does 988 make it more accessible for like at-risk communities, maybe racialized communities? You mentioned indigenous communities as well, to access the services. And are there like specific services that folks can access?
Yeah, so that's something that's very important to us. And I think, it's ongoing. The development's ongoing. When we were planning 988, we spoke to over 50 communities that have kind of intersectional identities, so community LGBTQ2A plus communities, Indigenous communities, Black Canadians, people with different abilities, disabilities. We spoke with the deaf and hard of hearing community, and we continued to speak to people, first responders, healthcare providers, because different groups have different needs and things that they would make 988 feel like an inclusive and helpful space to them. And I think that's going to be ongoing development that we do. But for now, we have one specific service, and that's for Indigenous people. But also all responders are trained to really understand the importance of people's identities, and that identities are not one thing. We all have kind of multiple identities, and to really approach it not to understand every culture or every specific identity, but to have cultural humility and understand the importance of people's values and preferences. And that's part of making that connection, is understanding what's important to each caller.
Cool.
Yeah, and something I might want to add too is where I know that in terms of 988, we are focused on providing services in English and French. Something that I think people may not be as aware of or kind of not know is where like we also offer the language interpretation services, and also ways to kind of connect with people who are deaf, hard of hearing, and speech impaired too. So I have been able to kind of use the language interpretation services where someone can request a specific language to to communicate in, and responders are trained in being able to connect with a language interpretation service to kind of facilitate that communication piece during this time. And if for people who are, again, needing like are deaf, hard of hearing, or speech impaired, we do have training in terms of how to access like video relay services, like teletypewriter services, and also just internet protocol services as well. So it's where, yes, we do focus on English and French, but knowing that we can connect with a service to have us talk and communicate in other languages, and also to support people who are deaf, hard of hearing, and just speech impaired as well.
That's excellent. I think like it would be reassuring to know that if you're calling or you're texting in, you know you're about to have a difficult conversation no matter what, but like you're really prepared to have that. The person who's responding, the person who's picking up the phone is really prepared to have that conversation.
Yeah. And I think that's part of being with someone, that openness, that willingness to try to communicate in whatever way that person needs.
Well, yeah, I mean, something Erin said before I thought was quite profound, thinking about that you might be the first person receiving someone's verbally expressing what's going on inside. And that's a big piece. That's a big responsibility.
Big responsibility.
It's literally life-saving.
Yeah.
You know, if keeping something secret, it goes with shame, and that really increased risks. To share that makes connection, and that's very protective. Yeah,
for sure. Let's talk about some of the practical elements of 988. So who is it for? Who is calling in? It's not just for people who might be in distress, right? You could be calling on behalf of somebody else.
Right. The most important thing, 988 is for everyone. So anyone.
We'll say that a few times.
Yes. If anyone who is in any kind of distress or just thinking, about thoughts of suicide, or just thinking about things that are stressing them out or worrying them, again, there's no wrong number. So we encourage anyone to call. And if you're worried about someone, it's a great resource. The responder will talk to you, talk you through that, and support you to figure out next steps to help the person you care about.
I think that's so encouraging too, because I mean, just thinking, trying to be empathetic towards someone who's calling, I could see that as being kind of a barrier too, right? Like, am I in crisis enough to use this service, right?
Yes.
Which is, so important to know that, like, no, just call. Just call if you feel like
there's
you need
no
to call, right?
threshold that there needs to be to know. Aaron's is nodding his head wildly, right? Like, I think probably because you receive calls from a variety probably of different people in different stages or different needs, right? Yes. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and that itself, I think, again, speak in general with just crisis intervention is where a lot of people feel that, like crisis, or like suicide helplines, like I have to be actively thinking about killing myself to call. It's like, yes, please call. Yes. But also knowing that there are also other checkpoints before that you can still connect with us. Like, even if you're having just either passive ideation, like active ideation, that's still enough for you to call. That's where it doesn't have to get to the point of a specific crisis for you to call. You can do it proactively, because I also had some service users where they're like, I have a safety plan. Like, I'm not going to hurt myself, but I just need to call right now because that's part of my safety plan. That's part of my proactive way of addressing my suicide ideation and my suicide behavior. So like, that's where I think, again, kind of debunking that, where it's not just having to be at that critical threshold in a way to kind of call us. Like, you can still call us at any time. And in terms of kind of like that piece of someone who isn't having thoughts of suicide, but is worried about someone in their life, that is something that a lot of people also realize that is possible when they call in. Because I've had callers where they're like, I'm not having any thoughts of suicide, but I'm worried about someone else. Yeah. Like, is this the right number? I was like, yes, it is the right number. Yeah. And that's where, as responders, like, we're able to support these people who are worried about other people in terms of kind of talking like what a safety plan is, talking about kind of like what you should and shouldn't do when you're talking with someone who you're worried about. And even for me, sometimes I would say, like, to encourage the person in crisis to call 988, or even that person and the person in crisis being together to call us. Because that's where that person who is worried about the person in crisis can be that bridge to accessing services, where we know that people who like are going through crisis might feel that they could like figure things out on their own, or that it's not like serious enough. If someone in their life recognizes and tells them that this is something that is concerning and gives them that feedback that this is something that they need help with, or just need that support with, having that person be that bridge between them and 988 is something that's really crucial and really important in terms of just supporting people's mental health. Similar to what Dr. Crawford said, anyone can call at any point. That's just kind of my things that I've noticed as I've been on the lines.
I think that's like such an important message too, because I think part of it in terms of accessing, or if you have a loved one, someone you care about, you want to help, get help, figuring out that first step, like it's really important to have a number like this to call, because I think a lot of the time it's just a matter of, I don't know who to call, or I don't know who to reach out to. Is it my family doctor? Is it?
Right.
So yeah, I think that's a really important message too.
There's another group of people that do sometimes call, and that's people who've lost someone to suicide, and that's also very important. That's a really we know that for everyone who is tragically lost to suicide, that impacts, we used to say 6 people, but research has shown that it's over 120 people can be really impacted, and that it actually increases risk for them. So if that's something people are struggling with, 988 is also a place to call to get support.
Wow.
Very cool. So I think what I'm hearing is that, if you're thinking about calling, you should just call.
Yes. That's right. You don't need to work it out.
You don't need, and there's no threshold. You don't need to work it out yourself. Go ahead and call. And if you're calling on behalf of someone, you're going to be well supported or provided advice about how to support someone else.
Exactly.
Call or text.
Call or text. Yes. Thank you, Erin, for that reminder. Call or text. Allison, maybe you could give us a little bit of information. Let's say you're calling on behalf of someone else. What are some of the early warning signs or signs where you might be concerned about someone who's in distress or might have suicidal thoughts?
Yeah, I always find this question challenging because we always know that everyone's different, and sometimes people don't know and can feel a lot of guilt after the fact, looking back, should I have seen something? So really important to say that there's no one sign. However, if you have any, often it's a change in behavior, and of many kinds. Could be sleeping more, sleeping less, being irritable, being down, drinking more, consuming more substances, going through a very difficult time. We know that loss, especially things like loss of jobs, loss of relationships, can be really destabilizing for all of us. I always say the most important thing is just ask. Just say, I'm really worried about you. How are you doing? Is there anything I can do to help? And in fact, once you have that connection with the person, not being afraid to ask, I'm worried. Do you ever think about suicide? Are you thinking about suicide? It will not, it will not contribute to someone thinking about that or contribute to the likelihood that they'll hurt themselves. It'll just open a conversation.
I would love to talk more about that, about just talking about mental health and including suicide. So opening up that dialogue, you're saying, is very important, right? And checking in on people. I think there's been a belief that talking about it might normalize it, right? And so maybe Allison, you could talk about the difference between reducing stigma and having the conversation versus normalizing suicide.
Yes.
How do we have those tricky conversations?
Well, I think with just that kind of, awareness and thinking, is this, as a society, are we making things better here? Research can really help. It's only, probably in the last 10 to 15 years that we realize that the way we report on suicide, for example, in newspapers, can really have an impact on the way people think about suicide and even their likelihood of engaging in self-harm or suicidal behavior. So absolutely it can, we have to have both conversations, let's talk openly, but then let's also be thoughtful and understand if how we talk is the helpful way to talk. Around stigma, I think a lot of it is just thinking about the language that we use. Language has a huge power. Even something like committed suicide is something that many people still say, and that's really a very old term when it was illegal or it was a crime to try to end your own life. So you're committed, did an illegal act. Something simple like that and taken for granted can really shape the way we think about something. So being aware of our language, I think, is one of the best ways we can combat stigma. Being willing to talk about it so that it's not a secret, it's not shameful. On the other hand, there are things, kind kind of speaking about suicide in a glorified way, or or heroic way, or giving lots of details about suicide. Those things are actually can be quite dangerous for the people hearing them.
I think it's interesting too. I remember someone hearing, or there's an old turn of phrase or something about if we all had access to each other's thoughts in our heads, it would be a pretty wacky thing that place that we're in, right? So, I mean, Aaron, you mentioned before about like vocalizing those things, and I think that's really powerful too, to enable those conversations, because I've had that experience. I've had some issues with anxiety in my life and stuff like that, where what's going on in my head seems so rational. And then when I start talking about it, I'm like, whoa, that wasn't rational at all, when I have a chance to actually talk it through with someone, right? So I think like that in itself is a really powerful thing to do.
Yeah, so keeping the lines of communication open, and at the same time being really mindful of our language. And I happened to be on the 988 website yesterday, and I noticed there's a whole section on language and how to be mindful and how to talk to people. I'm sure Aaron knows that part inside out, right?
Yeah, and I think something I would say too is where I know that in terms of like the language, like committed suicide is still kind of like the common term that we use. Right. An alternative that we can use is someone who died by suicide. And that's an alternative that we can give people to say, like, hey, like this person died by suicide. And that's where, again, there is not that connotation that they did something illegal, which again, that committed suicide still has that connotation to incarceration and just kind of that period of time when suicide was illegal. So dying by suicide would be an option to say, and just having that person first language. Right. And that's where it is something that's really important for us to, again, be mindful of that language and how we speak to people.
Yeah, and I think in the spirit of like open dialogue, and just picking up what you said, Aaron, it's like you can talk to someone and have these conversations about checking in, and then you could also talk to them about 988 and the service that's available. And like you said, Aaron, have that conversation or call in together. I think that that's so cool, because if you're scared to make the call yourself, you can have someone there with you. Exactly. It can be anonymous, or you could be supported by someone, right?
Exactly. And something I would say too is where just a thought that I had when Dr. Crawford was talking about kind of just like language, just how we approach people, is where for people who are worried for someone else, and this is something that is like out of their wheelhouse, like they have never experienced someone telling them that they have thoughts of suicide before, you can also call in to 988 and like talk with the responder to be like, hey, like, how could I say this? Or like, hey, like, you can practice, like, I haven't had a call like this, but for example, like I can imagine that someone could ask like, hey, like, can I practice asking if you're having thoughts of suicide with you on this phone? And I was like, yeah, it's like, you can do that, right? So that's where like 988 responders are familiar with how to talk about suicide and how to approach suicide, people who are experiencing suicide thoughts and behaviors. So again, if someone's worried about someone and they don't know how to even start the conversation, connect with 988 to be kind of having us become that consult. It's like, hey, like, should I say this? How do I say this? Like, is it okay to say it like this? Or is like having people practice? Because again, having that space for vulnerability and for learning allows us to open up these conversations, because as Dr. Crawford said, some people can feel that pressure, right, to kind of approach someone because they don't want to say something wrong, or they don't want to do something that might in a way kind of be triggering or be invalidating to the person in crisis. So so in terms of 988, like we're also here to kind of talk people through how to talk about suicide and to give people that comfortability too. So again, being creative, right, of to how to connect with 988, where it's, yes, also helping out with that suicide intervention and suicide prevention, but also that advocacy and just the promotion to have more conversations like this as well.
To be continued in part 2.
Thanks for tuning in to Healthy Canadians. If you're watching on YouTube, click the like button and subscribe to stay up to date on all future episodes. Find us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a review if you like what you heard. For more information on health topics that matter to you, visit canada.ca/health.